dress and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed. Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. And speaking of today, it's got a couple of nicknames. Bleak Friday, April Cruel Day are just 2. Energy prices have gone through the roof with the price cap increased by 54%. And of course, we all know by now that there's a whole suite of other costs about to increase as well. Is the government doing enough? That's what I want to know tonight. And Britain has told Ukraine not to back down from bully Putin amid fears that US, France and Germany may edge Zelensky to accept an early peace deal. But surely the decision of what to do rests with Ukraine. Why do so many countries feel a need to poke their noses into the conflicts of others? And today also sees the end of free lateral flow tests in England. I personally say good riddance, let's get back to normal. We don't obsessively test or report daily rates of anything else, so why COVID? Am I wrong? An SNP minister plans to seize Henry VIII powers to unilaterally amend any act of parliament in a crisis has received the biggest published backlash in the history of devolution. It got me thinking actually about devolution more generally. Is it something we need more of or less? All that to come, but first the latest news headlines.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. The cost of living crisis has worsened for many households in Britain today, with the energy price cap rise taking effect. On average, gas and electricity bills will cost an extra £700 a year. And this comes ahead of the increase to national insurance later this month. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government needs to do more.
The government response has been utterly pathetic. No real response to that, no comfort to people who are so worried. What we, the Labour Party, have said is, look, the oil and gas companies in the North Sea have made excess profits over and above what they expected because of the high level of pricing across the world. That windfall tax should be used to take up to £600 off people's bills. And that is a practical solution to a very, very real problem.
Criminal and civil investigations have been launched into P&O Ferries surrounding the recent redundancies. The government's announced the probe is being carried out by the UK's Insolvency Service. P&O Ferries boss Peter Hebblethwaite admitted breaking the law when the company sacked 800 seafarers last month, replacing them with agency workers on cheaper salaries. A Red Cross convoy travelling to the besieged city of Mariupol in the south of Ukraine has been forced to turn around. The teams were en route to evacuate thousands of civilians who've been trapped by Russian forces with little food, water, medicines or power. Moscow had agreed to open a humanitarian corridor today, but Ukrainian officials say they're breaking their promise and that it's very dangerous for anyone trying to enter or leave. Refugees fleeing Mariupol have described the devastation they've witnessed.
I was in Mariupol the whole time. We just slowly watched how the number of our homes was getting smaller every day. Everyone I know, they don't have a house right now. I also don't have a house, and all the belongings that I have with me, that's all I took out.
We waited for the negotiations so much for 2 or 3 days. But when we realised on March 22nd that we had food left for 2 days and we were drinking water only by 2 gulps, we decided to leave. But we were leaving under shelling. It was scary.
Well, meanwhile, the mayor of Kiev says there's a huge battle going on to the north and east of the city. Vitaly Klitschko's also warning those wishing to return to the capital should wait. The UK's Ministry of Defence says Ukraine has retaken some of the villages captured by Russia, but Kiev and Chernihiv have faced continued missile strikes. That's despite Russian claims of reduced activity. Well, the Education Secretary is urging councils to work with newly arrived Ukrainian families to ensure children can attend school as soon as possible. Nadeem Zahawi has written to all councils saying children arriving under the Homes for Ukraine and the Ukraine Family Schemes have the right to education while they're in the UK. He also urged schools to be flexible when it comes to class size limits. A Metropolitan Police officer has pleaded guilty to voyeurism and several sexual offences at Wimbledon Magistrates Court. 36-year-old Swale Chowdhury was arrested while secretly filming a woman as she was getting changed in a clothes shop in South London. He's also pleaded guilty to possessing extreme pornography and making indecent images of children. He was suspended from duty immediately after arrest. 19 environmental protesters have been arrested after blockading several oil terminals across England. The group called Just Stop Oil says they want the government to stop funding new oil licences. Several facilities were forced to suspend operations because of the obstructions. GB News reporter Amelia Harper spoke to one protester earlier.
Need to just stop oil, and if that's wind turbines, then I think that's a much smaller price to pay than the end of civilization as we know it, and I'm not exaggerating. We need to stop oil now or our children will have no future.
The first fines have been issued by the Met Police investigating Downing Street parties during lockdown. The fixed penalty notices relate to one of the earliest events under investigation held in the Cabinet Office on June the 18th, 2020. The £50 fines have reportedly been emailed to junior civil servants. And free COVID testing in England has come to an end today, as a record number of people in the UK have COVID. The Office for National Statistics say an estimated 4.9 million people had the virus at the end of last week, up from 4.3 million the week before. People at high risk and some health and social care workers will still be eligible for free tests. Well, on TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Michelle and Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. One of my favourite panels, I've got to say. And they've just pointed out to me when I greeted them tonight. I said, oh, look, it's one of my favourite panels. Apparently, last time I saw them, I said it was the most favourite panel. So I don't know what they've done since, but let's see how they perform tonight, shall we? We've got Ben Habib, who's a former Brexit Party MEP and CEO of the First Property Group. Jeevan Sander, who's an economist at King's College London. And Ali Miraj, who's a columnist at The Article and founder of the Contrarian Prize. And I also, you know the drill anyway on Dewbs & Co by now. It's not just about us and our thoughts. It's you at home as well and yours. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with me, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News. Don't forget, of course, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to us on YouTube we've got an app, we've got a podcast, we're on radio, DAB+, we are everywhere. So wherever you're watching or listening, good evening to you. You're very welcome tonight. One of the things I won't be talking about, by the way, the gents on the panel had a bit of a reaction to it, was the story about the protesters you just heard in the news headlines. I don't like giving them airtime. I think the more we talk about these kind of moronic behaviours, the more we fuel it. So I won't be talking about them anymore tonight. What I will be talking about today, though, is the millions of us that are going to be getting an electric shock, so to speak, when we see our energy bills. They're going to be rising by up to £700 a year. I refer, of course, to the 54% rise in the energy price cap. Basically means a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will now pay £1,900 a year. Now, let's not forget, it's not just energy that is going up, it's the cost of pretty much everything. Of course, many will say that to offset this, the government introduced a rise in the minimum wage and some financial support to soften the blow. But is the government doing enough? Jeevan Sandow.
Absolutely not. It is going to be a very expensive year for everybody ahead, but it's going to be the most deprived who suffer the most. Before today's 50% increase in energy prices, we saw 1 in 3 people struggling to heat their homes. That number is going to go up. 1 in 3 having to cut back on their food shop as well. Now, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, had an extra £20 billion in his pocket at this spring statement, unexpectedly. He could have raised social security payments in line with inflation. He chose not to do so. It means the most vulnerable in this country, children, pensioners, and the severely disabled who can't work, will suffer the most.
So you would have wanted him to raise benefits by more. What was it, 3.1% or something you're raising by? You would want a higher increase in that?
Certainly, at least more than 8%. And he had the money to do so. And those people
More than 8%?
More than 8%, which is what inflation will be in the next year. And even then, we've got to remember that those in the lowest incomes face a higher inflation rate. They spend more of their money on energy, more of their money on food. Both those prices are going to increase, in part because of the invasion, or Putin's invasion in Ukraine.
Ben Habib?
Well, in very substantially agree with what Jeevan said. You know, I think that we've got a perfect economic storm. And, you know, if you just cast your mind back a little bit, just to try and understand how we got here, it's a direct result of lockdown and bad energy policy from the government. Lockdowns created a complete breakdown in our supply chains, and our government, frankly, was asleep at the wheel. Everyone will recall, viewers will recall, that when we were going through lockdown, the Prime Minister said, well, we're going to use this opportunity for a green new revolution. We're going to become the Saudi Arabia of wind. Well, that hasn't worked so well, has it? Actually, the reality is all economies, particularly Western economies, turn on the use of gas and oil. And we were irresponsible in the way that we let our reserves drop, the way that we haven't exploited natural resources we have in this country that could have alleviated the problems that we're now facing. You know, we deliberately turned our back on fracking. We deliberately haven't been issuing licenses for more gas extraction from the North Sea. And at the end of the day, and this is very basic economics, with which I think Jeevan will definitely agree, is that if you want to solve a problem of inflation, you don't do it by fueling demand. You don't do it by putting a few extra quid in people's back pockets. The way you do it is by increasing supply of whatever that substance is that's caused the constraint in the first place. In this case, it's fuel. So the key thing this government needs to do is get off its high horse on this drive to net zero, at least for the short to medium term, and put in place a coherent energy strategy which makes the United Kingdom self-sufficient for gas and oil. And we are able to do that. That's what they have to focus on.
And that's great, Ali, but that doesn't help us in the immediate term, does it? It's all well and good talking about fracking and should we do net zero or not. But right now, in the here and the now, people, I mean, it's snowing in parts of the UK, and a lot of people will not be able to put their heating on. They'll be frightened to put their heating on.
That's right, and that's what's happening now. I think Ben makes a very good point about energy security more generally, which is a whole separate topic. But on the specifics of this current situation, Michelle, look, I do understand. I accept what Jeevan says about the poorest in society are going to be the hardest hit. The reality is we're all going to have to tighten our belts. The most help should be directed to the most disadvantaged in society, right? I agree with that. However, I just want to defend Rishi Sunak here a little bit here, because he's been having a very tough time over the last couple of weeks, and I don't think it's completely justified. Look, he's gone from the greatest thing since Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC, right, when he was doling out cash with furlough schemes and bounce back loans, to now being vilified. The reality is that we have had an economic shock, the like of which we've not seen since World War II, which was the COVID pandemic.
No. It was the lockdowns, Ali. It wasn't the pandemic.
I know that you've got a specific view on lockdowns, but just on this, hear me out. We had to spend a lot of money, 400 billion of borrowing he had to do. Now, on the back of that, he's also got 2 trillion of public debt. Now, Jeevan points to the fact that he's got 20 billion of headroom. The reason why he hasn't spent the 20 billion of headroom up front completely right now, which he could have done, it was a choice, is because he's saying, look, I'm going to do certain things. I'm going to reduce, I'm going to cut off 5p off fuel duty. I'm going to raise the starting point of national insurance. But he's going to keep some stuff in the locker for later, because he might have to intervene later in the year when the price cap is reviewed in October. And just one other final point is that interest rates are rising now. Jeevan talked about inflation rising, interest rates are rising. Rishi Sunak knows for every 1% increase in interest rates, it adds another 20 billion of debt service costs to servicing the public debt. So he knows that. He's very worried about that. So you've got to put it in context.
So, I mean, Labour, of course, we've got the local elections coming up in May. So Labour, this is a dream come true for them. The whole kind of cost of living, they are campaigning. They're going on the front foot with this. One of the things that they're saying is about the windfall tax, Jeevan, that we should have, we could still do it, actually. It's not ruled out. But there should be a windfall tax on energy companies. Would you support that?
Well, it certainly is a good idea, and actually does a good way of getting money from those kind of oil producers, seeing huge profits into families' pockets. And on the point of Labour, yeah, I think you're completely right. Everyone's going to be feeling this. We know that how much your incomes are growing in an election year really affect how you vote. And Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, not only, I think, made an economic and moral mistake, but a political one. Pensioners are the core Conservative vote, and he's just cut their pensions by over 5% this year. I don't know what he was thinking. And in the longer term as well, whenever the next election comes, 2024, income still won't be recovering that strongly. I also want to pick up on one other thing as well. It is true that Rishi had this kind of excess 20 billion he had there. He also decided to save some of that for an income tax in an election year. That was a nakedly political move because he thinks it will help him get re-elected in the future. But he chose not to help pensioners today. We shouldn't forget that choice that he made.
Ben,
well, I mean, I've got a real issue with Rishi Sunak. We locked down the economy, and that cost us, as Ali pointed out, I think it was around 500 billion is the figure I've got in my head, but 400 billion. National debt went up by 33%. And then as we unlocked, instead of helping the private sector and instead of helping people back into work, he's raised taxes. Corporation tax is heading up. National insurance went up today. We haven't talked about that, but at the same time...
As did the threshold, though. The threshold before you need to start paying it.
But employers pay another 1.25% out of their pockets from the ground up. So as of today, my company is now paying 15.05% employers' national insurance. It is a massive on-cost to the employment. It makes employers very reluctant to employ. You know, it's counterintuitive.
But if we don't do this, because one of the problems that we've got is, if I pick on social care, and I know that the national insurance initially was going to help in the NHS, but the longer-term social care, one of the problems is we have a problem with social care and funding social care in this country. This can has been kicked down the road for God only knows how many years. Successive governments have done nothing about it. This particular government has said, right, enough now. We're going to put a line in the sand. We're going to take action. We're going to fix this problem. It's not a popular option.
But you don't fix the problem by throwing more money at it. Anne Widdecombe, by the way, was on with Dan Wooden last night. She spoke eminent sense about the NHS and equally applicable to social care. There's got to be a revised assessment of what the NHS's function is.
That's a much bigger thing. But look, I think, Michelle, you make a very good point. That can was kicked down the road by successive governments. I mean, even it's been going on for years, right? It's never been, that nettle has never been grasped. You've got to give the government some credit for at least fessing up to the issue. Look, people have got different views on how that should have been financed. They said we're going to do it via a 1.25% increase in national insurance. And what this has meant now, Rishi Sunak increasing the thresholds, what this means is then instead of 12 billion being spent next year, it's going to be 6 billion spent next year. Now, that is effectively a real terms cut in the funding for the NHS. Now, you've also got to bear in mind that we've got a 6 million waiting list and rising.
And rising.
In the NHS at the moment. My biggest concern, actually, when this whole thing was announced was that the poor social care sector will never see the money because the NHS won't get its grubby arms off it because it needs the money all the time. The NHS is constantly needing more and more financing.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So that is a bigger problem. But look, back to the core issue. It is going to be difficult. The problem is we are going to have to tighten our belts. The most support should be directed to the most disadvantaged in society. The rest of us are going to be in for a period that is rocky and tough and hard. And we've got to get real. We've just had a 2-year period, which has been one of the most seismic shocks to the UK economy since the end of World War II.
But Ali, it was the most seismic shock. It was a seismic shock delivered through government policy.
Yeah, it was a choice.
It was a choice. We had 2 years to get ready to unlock. We had 2 years to recognise what steps we had to take in order to recover from that economic
shock. But Ben, how are we going to pay for all of it? You want
well, if you're going to spend, just mathematically, if you're going to spend 500 billion shutting the economy down, you should be prepared to spend an equal amount getting the economy going. It kind of sounds symmetrical to me. If you're going to spend 500 billion shutting us down, you've got to be prepared to spend that again to get us out. It's not about national debt at the end of the day. It's not about the government's interest bill. It is about growth in the economy.
But we've got a specific issue right now, Ben, with energy prices.
Yeah, but we've got a specific issue and we've got to stop knee-jerk reactions dealing with specific issues. Everything I see with this government is a knee-jerk reaction. We need urgently a proper energy policy so that by October we've got North Sea back on tap. So Quadrilla or other companies can actually get fracking. They've got to get off their backsides and actually have a coherent strategy. The other thing I just want to point out is he's chucking money at people to pay off their fuel bills. At the same time as raising taxes. It's just counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. And then you've got the Bank of England similarly raising interest rates. So you've got no coherency between monetary and fiscal policy at the moment. You've just got a completely incoherent set of government policies.
I'm not so sure that is so incoherent, right? Because on the one hand, the Bank of England does want to tamp down demand. On the other hand, you also want to help families out as well.
But
you
it's
want to
incoherent.
Do inflation
You're pumping money into the system and you're trying to take money out of the system.
But the monetary side would do that, right? You are trying to tamp down demand on that side. And also a lot of our inflation at the moment is being driven by this kind of cost pressure. So actually a lot of it is being driven by
chains,
which is not so much to the demand side. But I agree there's also a demand side response that has to happen. I would also do agree with Ben in terms of our debt. We should remember that actually Rishi Sunak is in a far better position than we thought so. The UK economy is more than capable of servicing its debt. You know, we think debt to GDP will peak at about 95%. When you buy your house and you get a loan out, a mortgage, your debt to GDP ratio, your debt to income ratio is 300%, 3 to 1. You pay that down over your lifetime. The difference between us and a government is that governments don't die. Governments don't have to pay down their debt to zero, and we're borrowing at 0%. Our debt is more than serviceable, something to worry about.
This is the mantra I've heard from people on the left, right, for a long time. The problem is interest rates are now rising. There's no free lunch here. The only way governments can raise money is either taxing you more or borrowing more. In a rising interest rate environment, that is going to cost more. The reality is we just have to get real as a public here that we have had a really seismic shock. We are going to have to tighten our belts. I understand the point that you make, Ben, about growth. But I also feel that unless you want to mortgage the future of our kids in terms of this and pass the burdens on, we've got to actually raise taxes.
Ali, I so disagree. We did. The Conservative government's been now in power for 12 years, give or take the coalition. And they have had exactly the same policy again and again. When they dealt with the credit crunch, they had the Bank of England print enough money to bail out the banks, and then they stopped and they instituted austerity. This time round, they've had the Bank of England again print just about enough cash to get rid, to deal with this economic busting lockdown policy. And then as soon as we get out of lockdown, they say, well, now we've got to be austere. No, you've got to go for growth. You've destroyed growth. The banks destroyed growth. Growth had to be re-engineered in the economy. You can't just bail out the banks and then fail to bail out...
So you're calling for a tax cut now?
We need tax cuts. We need tax cuts urgently. Corporation tax should not be being increased. We should not be signing up to a global minimum standard of 15%.
Than when George Osborne was in. He's raising it to 19 to 25%. It's still going to be lower.
It needs to come back. Business rates need to be cut. It's absolutely iniquitous that we pay massive business rates for premises. The sectors most hard hit, hospitality, retail, they have the biggest property costs and they need their taxes cut. National insurance needs to be cut, not increased. Income tax, frankly, should be cut at the lowest levels, not for the rich people, not for people like me, but for the lower earners. They have to cut tax.
It is going to be. The income tax is going to be reduced, isn't it, in 2024?
In 2024.
Just before the election.
As Jeevan said, as an election throwaway. I mean, and to admit that now really reveals so much about their ideology.
If you listen to what Rishi Sunak said a few weeks ago at the Mays lecture at Bayes Business School, I listened to him very carefully. What he said was, in his DNA, he is a tax-cutting kind of person, right? Which is what a lot of Conservatives are. The reality is he wants to do it on a fiscally responsible basis. At the moment, the fiscal position does not allow.
Right, we've had 12. Can I just say this? We've had 12 years of Conservative government. We've had 12 years of Conservative government. Debt to GDP ratio has never been higher than it is now. Taxes as a proportion of GDP haven't been as high as this since World War II. This Conservative government and Rishi Sunak is not a tax cutter. They've got no fiscal probity. They are socialists. What we've got in government are socialists.
Right, well, speaking of socialism, I want a really brief yes or no answer from each of you. Bernard has emailed in saying about all of this, this is the time to nationalise the utilities. Yes or no, Ben?
No.
No?
It's complicated.
Complicated? You can't sit on the fence.
There are common ownership ways that could work, but I don't think it's like a simple yes and no answer at this point.
Ali?
No, but you rely on regulators to make sure people don't get ripped off.
Yeah. Right, well, Trevor has also emailed in saying, I'm hearing everyone crying out for the government's help with taxpayers, but nobody helped us in the early 80s when we had things like mortgage rates at 16%, he says. Enid has been in touch saying it's snowing here and freezing cold. I'm a pensioner and I'm in bed already watching you with a hot water bottle and the cat.
That's good, actually.
Yeah, it does, actually. Yeah, we'll all come to your bed. There you go. We'll heat your bed up for you, Enid. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about Ukraine. Britain has warned Ukraine's president to remain strong in the face of Russian aggression. But what's it got to do with us when Ukraine actually decide to accept peace deals and when they don't? Why is everyone so keen to be telling Ukraine what to do and when to do it? I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Just a very brief reminder as to who my panel is tonight. Someone's already emailed in saying you are the dream team. It's Ben Habib, who's a former Brexit Party MEP and CEO of the First Property Group, Jeevan Sandhu, who's an economist at King's College London, and Ali Miraj, who's a columnist at The Article and founder of the Contrarian Prize. Lots of you getting in contact. I want to find some people that think that the government is doing enough. Not many of you seem to be out there, / none of you seem to be out there. So if you are out there and you're watching, listening, and you're shouting at your telly or your radio, yes, Rishi is doing enough, get in touch with me. I want to hear those thoughts. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs. Now, Britain has warned Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to remain strong in the face of Russian aggression, because the UK is worried that other allied leaders could push him to agree a peace deal with Russia, which would favour President Putin. It's believed the UK government thinks that a peace deal must be made with Ukraine in a strong position. Britain fears that if Ukraine is pushed into a peace deal by, say, America, France and Germany, then Putin will enjoy weaker sanctions and could possibly avoid prosecution as a war criminal, amongst other concessions in return for the end of the hostilities. Ali, let me start with you on this. There seems to be a lot of people telling Ukraine what they should and shouldn't do. Surely it's Ukraine and Ukraine alone that should decide what to accept, when to accept it.
No, I think that's right. But also, I think there's a couple of other points to note in recent days. There was General Sonic Parker, former head of UK land forces, saying that NATO had actually failed in its defence of Ukraine, and actually they should be looking now to work with a smaller group of nations to find a more offensive strategy vis-à-vis Russia.
But why is it NATO's job to defend Ukraine if Ukraine's not
indeed, I agree. I totally agree with that. The issue you've got here, Michelle, is you've got a situation where everyone's got their own interest. The Germans, for example, are very much dependent on Russian gas, so they're not going to be as open or as vociferous as the UK is. Zelensky likes Boris. The UK has given a lot of support, particularly in terms of lethal aid to Ukraine as well, which has been welcome. The US, for its part, would not give the MiG fighter jets from Poland that Poland wanted to deploy, without NATO personnel, by the way, give them the MiG fighter jets, because the US was saying that it would be an offensive, it would be regarded as an offensive tactic. The reality is NATO's already involved to a degree, right, by giving weapons. The fundamental thing that I'm struggling with is if Zelensky ends up, as he's indicated partly in recent days, that he signs away Donbass, he signs away Crimea, he recognises Crimea belongs to Russia, and he signs a treaty recognising the fact that Ukraine will remain a neutral country and not join NATO. The question I've got is, why do we have to end up here in the first place? That was exactly what Putin was asking for all along. I'm struggling to understand it. So thousands of people have to die for us to reach the same position we could have been at before we started this fiasco.
I think actually Putin doesn't have a right to take what he likes. So in the first instance, it was up to Ukraine whether or not those regions would want to have joined Russia. And in particular, we think about what's going to happen, the likely contours of a peace deal. It will be a referendum that will be kind of issued to the Ukrainian people. And I suspect in that kind of period, the Crimea may go over to Russia, but it doesn't, like to say, will happen in Donetsk and Luhansk.
But NATO was spurring him on. NATO was spurring him on about the sovereignty issue, right? NATO was saying Ukraine is a sovereign nation. Exactly to this point, but NATO's not going to go in physically, so they've let them down. They've neither let Ukraine join NATO, nor have they supported them in this particular case. It's the worst of all worlds.
We've supplied a lot of aid, and we have helped Ukraine defend themselves. We didn't enter into a war that would have ended up into World War III. It would have been incredibly difficult. And actually, I do think that we can't say to dictators when they threaten to invade, yes, we'll give you what you want to have. Because think about the kind of the future, and we have seen this happen before, and we saw it happen in the 1950s. 1930s when we did say, yes, you can have what you like because you're threatening it.
I support everything Ali said. I mean, this is classic Western foreign policy, fighting a proxy war. It's Ukrainians dying, not British, German or American soldiers. And ultimately, whether you've supplied a few lethal weapons or humanitarian aid doesn't give you the right of say. This is for a Ukrainian decision. But I find it really amusing. I find our Prime Minister amusing quite often. But I find him particularly amusing trying to embolden the Ukrainians to be firm with Russia. You know, when he himself is so weak in the face of the EU. He capitulated on the withdrawal agreement. He capitulated on the Northern Ireland Protocol. He capitulated on a level playing field. He capitulated on our fishing rights. And here he is, trying to egg on the Ukrainians.
How do you get to Brexit from Ukraine? I love your pivots here.
No, but, you know, here's a man who wants to thump his chest and be all Churchillian in the way that he deals with things. But actually, when he has to take the stand, he doesn't do it. No, we have no right to be lecturing the Ukrainians. This is their decision, and they have to judge how many more deaths they're prepared to tolerate before they reach a peace agreement. But, you know,
one of the things I honestly feel is, and this is not to be a Putin apologist, I mean, look, he clamps down on dissent. He is an autocrat, so no, I don't think there are very many people who would be defending Vladimir Putin's actions. However, he did make it very clear in 2007 that the thought of Ukraine joining NATO would be a red rag to a bull. It was a red line for him. In 2008, George W. Bush at the Bucharest conference on NATO said that Georgia and Ukraine should be part of NATO.
Absolutely.
What on earth were they thinking? If the Soviets put missiles in Cuba in 1962, it nearly led to World War III. If the Russians were to put missiles in Mexico, how would Joe Biden react?
Absolutely.
Honestly, this is not about, in my view, this whole nonsense we hear about this is a battle between democracy versus autocracy. Putin doesn't care about spreading autocracy to Ukraine. This is about power. It's about balance of power, spheres of influence, and interest, naked self-interest of different states, and they all have them. Don't tell me that the US didn't have its interest in Iraq when Joe Biden now last week is lecturing us on about moral authority. I think the moral authority was evaporated when the US went into that.
Absolutely
right. I think you raise an interesting point here about this expansion of NATO to the east, because for some reason, a lot of people want to deny that this was essentially the one of, if not the reason that this conflict
no one wants to talk about that.
has begun. But why?
Well, the thing is, look, to do that is not to be an appeaser of Putin, right? Putin is got his own interests. He's not a figure who takes any dissent whatsoever. He's an autocrat, right? So no one's defending that, certainly not me. But on the sheer foreign policy element of it, and the fact that if you are expanding, you're bumping up to NATO's borders on Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Ukraine is a red line for Putin. He made it clear again and again and again. And if you look at the NATO website, you'll see this has been going back years that they've been cozying up. The real issue is the Ukrainians have been let down, a bit like the Turks were let down with respect to the EU. You sort of dangle this carrot. It's a bit like dating a girl and never offering to marry her, right? You end up in this situation where the Ukrainians are neither part of NATO nor are they not part of NATO.
We've done it across the globe, Ali, haven't we? We encouraged the Kurds to rise up against Saddam Hussein, and then we weren't there for them. We encouraged Afghanis to collaborate with us when we were in Afghanistan, and then we just bailed on them. We did the same in Syria. We encouraged the people to stand up against Assad, and then we didn't come to their assistance. We stirred up trouble in Libya. You know, we bombed Libya, and then we exited. We're really good at stirring up trouble, and we can't hide behind this faux claim to be exporting democratic ideology to these autocratic totalitarian. It's got nothing to do with it.
You know, the other thing, Ben, just one other thing. I was listening to Gillian Tett from the FT the other day, who was talking about the fact that, generally speaking, should make a general point. We do not have lateral vision. We have tunnel vision. We never bother to put ourselves in the shoes of our opponents, our enemies, to think about how our actions might be perceived from their perspective. Not to sympathise with them, just to actually get our own foreign policy correct, right? No one ever thinks about this from the position of Moscow, how it would be perceived to be NATO bumping up against your border.
Yeah, and I do. That is the point in all of this, Ali, that I've just found peculiar, that people don't want to have that conversation. And if you dare and have that conversation, straight away people are going, she's apologising for Putin, he's apologising for Putin. I find it very bizarre. Anyway, final word to you on this, Stephen.
Well, actually, I think Ukraine, if they had wanted to join NATO, it would have been their decision. Beforehand, Biden had already indicated that it would be a neutral state, that Ukraine would not join in the near future. It also doesn't really matter in one sense what Putin says. When he talks about spheres of influence, it was the same justification used by Stalin at the end of the Second World War to justify the Iron Curtain. We shouldn't give in to that kind of justification. And also, Putin is a man, as we've seen in his statements, not just before the war, but his essay as well, who doesn't believe Ukraine is a real country. He does believe it is part of Russia. He believes it was his right to go in there. Actually, the guy who is to blame for this is to Putin. That is who it is. And the final fun fact is this. Russia, at the end of the 90s and the 2000s, was talking about joining NATO itself. Putin's change against NATO has been very kind of vociferous, certainly, but also was not always the way he kind of reasoned and had his rationale going back.
Yeah, I mean, and let's not forget when we talk about NATO expansion, it started off with, I think, 12 countries, is now 30. Make of that what you will. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll have some more of your reaction, and I want to talk about COVID from today. Free COVID testing will basically only continue in England for certain groups. But what I want to know is, who is it that's wanting to do COVID testing and for it to continue? It's not me. Is it you? I'll have that and more after the break.
Every night at 11 on GBNews, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. A quick reminder as to who my panel are. Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP and CEO of the First Property Group, Jeevan Sander, who's an economist at King's College London, and Ali Mirage, who's a columnist at The Article and founder of the Contrarian Prize. Lots and lots of you guys getting in touch tonight saying, are you allowed to say guys now, by the way? Is that an acceptable word, guys?
Yeah, I think we're fine with that.
Yeah, good. Well, yeah, I'll embrace it while I still can.
Lots of it's being in touch.
Yes, lots of them, or there, or whatever it is. Anyway, lots of you getting in contact. Really enjoying the debate. I have to say, I'm enjoying it as well. These guys are working hard to regain the top status as my top panel. Now, one of you got in touch, and I have to say, yes, there you go, I found it, Brian. Brian says, I am fed up with everyone knocking the government. Increasing utility bills, etc. isn't good. But how about people start cutting their cloth accordingly? He goes on to say, what about people looking at their own behaviours, smoking, drinking, how they use electricity, etc. He says, we've got to stop wanting to be a handout country. There you go. That's Brian in Exeter. What do you think to Brian's thoughts? Let me know. Shall we talk COVID for a brief moment? I wish I didn't have to. I can't wait for the day where I never need to mention the C word ever again. But it's not today, I'm afraid. Because from today, free COVID testing will only continue in England for certain groups, with others who think they've got coronavirus simply told to stay at home. Long story short, basically, if you do have to pay for these tests, they're going to cost you about a £5. Let's just get to the point. Ben Habib, should we still be testing ourselves for COVID?
Absolutely not. I mean, we started this programme discussing, the massive ills that we're now facing as a result of our policies towards COVID during lockdown and so on. And we've just got to get over COVID. COVID is now part of the spectrum of diseases with which we now have to live. And that's my final word on it, frankly. I've got nothing else to say. Turn our back on COVID and get on with life.
Jeevan?
Well, I think we do have to learn to live with COVID. Actually, I think we want to see some testing around. I think we're talking about it in the healthcare sector. I think also the education sector. We're seeing huge kind of absences of teachers because part of the problem is, the good news is we can live with COVID now. The good news is it doesn't kill nearly as many people now, but it's still a very infectious disease that does kind of make people ill and stops them going to work. So actually, making sure there are some tests available to stop it spreading so widely isn't a bad use, but also, look, there is a good news here, and the good news is we're kind of leaving this pandemic after 2 years of going through it, and I don't think anyone here enjoyed that particular period very much.
No, we did not. Ali?
Look, at the moment it's a bit of a raw situation because I've just lost a cousin to COVID very suddenly, and it's all extremely raw at the moment. So I don't believe it's a flu. I do believe it is more potent, and I also feel that it affects people in different ways. I mean, one of my colleagues is extremely young, fit, completely healthy, and she's been really badly affected with this by this for months now. It's taking a long time to recover. Look, I do think that testing in general is still sensible and a good idea. I do not believe that the government should have to pay for that unless you're in the NHS and you're mixing with people who are vulnerable on a day-to-day basis. Then I think there should be some support there. But generally speaking, I don't think the government should be funding COVID tests for the rest of the population indefinitely. I think we need to take responsibility again for ourselves. I think we're now moving from pandemic to endemic status, although case numbers are rising. Thankfully, hospitalisation rates and deaths in particular are not despite what I've just said about my cousin, they're not, thankfully. But I do think we need to be mindful and we need to sort of move on. But I don't think the government should fund it, but I do think there is a place still for testing in society.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say as well, I think COVID has actually affected people's brains. Because I'm serious. I can see such change in people's attitudes. I think people have become really divided. I mean, I didn't even think we could get more divided than we were, with the whole Brexit thing. But I think it's really kind of put a deep division in people, those that wanted lockdowns, those that absolutely didn't want lockdowns, those that kind of want everyone to stay at home for as long as possible versus those that want to unlock. I think it's unlocked a sense of kind of almost hatred towards people. I think it's unlocked a sense of suspicion. Like, I'm quite suspicious of people and things now. I don't believe kind of what I'm told, like official information anymore. I might perhaps have taken things at face value once, whereas now I don't know why.
Well, that's a good thing to scrutinise. It's a good thing to scrutinise.
Yeah, and I think you're right though, Michelle, because government policy on COVID has flip-flopped. We were told wash your hands for 20 seconds and sing happy birthday and everything will be fine. And then we had a national lockdown 3 weeks later. We were told that, it was the elderly that were vulnerable, but actually we never adopted a policy to protect the elderly. We adopted a sort of, general policy across the population. We were told that face masks were utterly useless. Do you remember at the beginning of the pandemic? We were told no one needs face masks, and then we were told, well, actually, they're utterly critical, and we have to wear them all over the place.
If I look at what's going on in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, for example, they've still got masks. They're going to continue with masks for at least a few more weeks. And I just sit and I think of these school kids And I think you've had these children now masked up since, what is it, September 2 years ago or something like that coming up to. And I think it's an outrage. And one of the things that we was doing the other day was actually the MP Christopher Chirp on this show a few days ago, actually. He's putting a bill through Parliament looking at the vaccine damage payment scheme. The abuse and the insults that I've received on social media over the last kind of 48 hours or so for having the audacity in some people's minds to even talk about the need to make sure that people that have got life-affecting side effects are compensated. I have been insulted, abused so badly for just suggesting, all I say is, there are people that have got life-affecting side effects. They should be compensated. The scheme should be looking after these people, and it's failing them. And for some people, that infuriates them, that single concept. And I don't understand it. I can only conclude that the world has gone mad. I do. I think that COVID has actually done stuff to people. And I've got long COVID, by the way, before anyone starts saying, oh, the COVID denier is off again. I don't deny COVID. I just think that what's happened to our society as a consequence of it is quite frankly bizarre. Anyway, let's talk about Scotland, shall we? The SNP has once again hit the headlines for all the wrong reasons after it was revealed that the party is looking to seize so-called Henry VIII powers that would allow them to unilaterally amend any act of Parliament in a crisis. The party claims it wants to be able to close schools, enforce stay-at-home restrictions and shut down hospitality venues beyond the COVID crisis without having to seek parliamentary approval. Got to say, it didn't go down too well, though, because 90% of the 4,000 organisations and individuals that responded to a Scottish parliamentary consultation opposed the move. Although, I've got to say, the SNP's John Sweeney claimed that the public backlash was whipped up by Tory MSPs who have misrepresented the move. Got me thinking, actually, Jeevan, about the whole concept of devolution. I mean, actually, to be honest, it got me thinking about the whole power grab, people desperately on a power trip. But, you know, I'll move on from that and focus on devolution. Your thoughts?
This isn't a devolution issue, I think. I think it's an SNP issue. This isn't going to go through with 90% of these 4,000 organisations objecting. I think we all think it's silly. I think everyone who's seen that thinks it's absolutely bizarre. And if a government in Westminster was to do it, we'd also think it's bizarre. Actually, the government in Westminster will step up and do it. I think we need more devolution in this country. The reason why we're so centralised and unequal, both economically and politically, is because everything's in Westminster. We need more power away from the centre. And also, well, unfortunately, sometimes regional governments will do, and indeed country governments will do silly things, but then everyone will see they're silly and they'll be stopped. So it is silly on the SNP. I don't think this is going to last very long.
Good. Ben?
Well, I think if you want a general guide in life about what is good and what is bad, anything instituted by Tony Blair is likely to have been bad. And devolution was one of his brainchilds. And the way he's done it is absolutely daft. I mean, the SNP is as daft as brushes, as we all know. But just look at Northern Ireland for a second, which, you know, a province with which I'm now very familiar. You have mandatory coalition government in Northern Ireland. If you're the DUP, UUP, Sinn Féin, if you're elected, you join in government. So what you have is a government without policies, and you have a constituent, significant constituent member of that government that wants the end of the United Kingdom. It's as daft as brushes. So I agree with Jeevan. We want to decentralise the way the United Kingdom it works, but I don't think you do it through devolution. I think you do it through much smaller units of operation, local councils, district councils, and so on. Devolution, I think, has been disastrous for the United Kingdom. It's allowed people like Nicola Sturgeon to have a soapbox. It pays MSPs, MLAs money effectively to do things that are not in the national interest. I would abolish devolution, and I would go to sort of much smaller units of operative authority.
Ali?
Yeah, look, I think the genie's out of the bottle on Scottish devolution, and I don't think it's reversible now. I think on a more fundamental point, I think the Scots will have to determine their own future again at some point, and I think that it's up to them to do. I mean, I hope they stay, but if they go, then that's their decision. The interesting thing is I can't imagine a border being erected at Berwick-upon-Tweed, but we're all armchair experts now on borders, and particularly borders in the Irish Sea. On this particular issue, I think it is crackers. I agree with Jeevan and Ben on this one in particular. I also believe, look, I'm not a lockdown skeptic. I did believe that towards the beginning of the pandemic, lockdowns. There was a rationale for them. We didn't know much about the disease at that point. So I'm not saying that I never believed in lockdowns, but I think on this particular case, any erosion of civil liberties in a way which are taken away from you needs to be taken very, very carefully, decisions on that, and they have to be done by elected representatives in a parliamentary body. It cannot be done at the whim of the executive. I think it's completely and utterly unjustified, and I think it's quite right that 90% of these organisations are opposing it, and I think Jeevan's absolutely right that I cannot see it seeing the light of day. But the very fact that it's even being discussed, frankly, really troubles me.
Yeah, I think one too many politicians, not just in this country, by the way, I'd expand it beyond just this country, but I think one too many politicians have really enjoyed a little bit too much this whole COVID setup for my liking. I think that they think that they're a little bit more important than they actually are. And this kind of idea, this concept, that they can just almost click their fingers and bring countries, it's countries plural, by the way, the global economy, as we were saying earlier on, Ben, it has been a choice to bring the world to its knees. I personally, my own opinion, not representing anyone else's, but I think it was a monumental overreaction. That's what I think. Lots of love coming in on the email for the panel tonight. Kenneth says that the four of us should be running the country. Goodness gracious. Can you imagine?
Well, it wouldn't agree. We'd be like the cabinet. We'd be totally divided.
Yeah. I'm not sure that you want us four in charge. Certainly don't want me in charge.
Well, we couldn't be any worse, could we?
This is very true, actually. By the way, you really keep knocking Boris Johnson. Who would you have instead of him?
I would have anyone other than Boris Johnson.
Keir Starmer?
Look, I think, funny enough, I'm not a Labour supporter at all, but funny enough, I think it may be a time for a change in government because the Conservative Party has so fundamentally lost its way. It needs a good kick in the shins to get back on track. It is not a Conservative Party. It's some people, some of my mates call it a con-socialist party, and I think that's more like.
Well, it was interesting just on that point, Ben, when the corporation tax rise was being discussed, it was actually Labour that was opposing it.
I know.
Inverted situation here, where the left is saying don't raise taxes, and the so-called centre-right or right are raising taxes. Bizarre situation.
And there was a poll out yesterday saying that the people trust Labour now more with taxes and the economy than they do the Tory party.
I know.
Did you see that one?
Yeah, what a strange set of circumstances we found ourselves in. Derek has been in touch saying COVID self-testing is basically great, Michelle, for anyone who wants to take a sickie. I am saying nothing, Derek. Anyway, that is pretty much the end of the show. Thank you very much to my panel, Ali, Ben and Jeevan, and thank you very much as well to you at home. Enid, I hope you're still watching, and I hope that you are staying warm in that bed of yours. It does indeed sound very cosy. Terry has been in touch saying today's show was fabulous. Terry, thank you very much for your company, and all the rest of you too. Have yourself a fantastic weekend, and we will see you on Monday.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. It's all about the chill this weekend. Cold out there tonight, a frosty start to Saturday, a sunny day for many. There will be a few showers around, but the winds won't be as strong as they have been. The isobars are just steadily spacing out as high pressure moves in. But it's not all about the high pressure. This weather front is drifting southwards, bringing wet weather to Northern Ireland this evening. And as that wet weather spreads across Wales, we will see some sleet and snow mixed in, and still some wintry showers, hail, sleet and snow across parts of eastern England, so it could turn icy here. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place, and it is going to be cold. Temperatures widely down below freezing, even in towns and cities, and some rural spots could be down to -5 or -6. So a cold start to Saturday. It could be icy across these eastern areas in the morning as the showers keep coming and going. The showers for South Wales and South West England will still have some sleet and snow mixed in as well, turning back to rain and drifting away. A few more scattered showers developing through the afternoon over the Midlands, east